You're listening to Permission To, the podcast where we dive into the science and soul of owning your worthiness as a perfectly imperfect human being. I'm your host, Sam Dew, psychotherapist, positive psychology coach, mama to a beautiful 5-year-old Amelie, and passionate advocate for living an inspired life. My aim is to show you that you have full permission to own your worthiness so that you can embrace your true nature and begin walking boldly toward your dreams. Let's dive in. So let me introduce you to Tara. Tara Winters is an award-winning money and spirituality coach, speaker, and mother of 3. After years of hiding her spirituality while working as a corporate accountant and downplaying her money wisdom in the spiritual world, she discovered that money and spirituality can, in fact, truly elevate one another. She now brings her unique medicine to lovingly guide people back to their souls and to support spiritual and creative folk to feel financially nourished so that they can do the work they came here to do. So I would love, if you're like, whatever you're open to sharing, this series is really about if you're happy to share a story or a time in your life where you felt that your self-worth was a bit wobbly, you know, that your sense of being innately whole and good enough was maybe a little bit shaky because of what was going on in life or what was happening in the world around you.
So the instance that comes to mind very quickly for me is around 11 years ago when I just had my 3rd baby. And at that time I had an almost 2-year-old and an almost 4-year-old. And to give you some context, I grew up as a very academic kid, and I built a lot of my sense of worth, my self-worth around achievement, around being productive, getting things done, and then later on that equated to in the workforce, like having a really good salary and earning and getting good performance reviews. And so when I had my 3rd child, he also had chronic health issues and wasn't able to go to childcare for quite a while, and I stayed home. We made a decision to take a couple of years out of the workforce to stay home with him and the others. And all those things that I built my self-worth around, being a high achiever, being really smart, earning good money, being seen as a success, all of it fell apart because day in, day out, all I was doing was looking after little babies who couldn't tell me how good I was.
Yeah. Oh, and we also live in a society where we aren't really valued as mothers. Like, we don't get paid for any of that incredibly important work that we do. So there's almost like another layer of not having any feedback or reinforcement, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost looked at myself through the eyes of what I assumed other people would be seeing me as. And I remember having like moments of like struggling to get out of the house and say going to the local park and just having, getting one kid out and putting them in the pram, getting another one out, putting them in the harness, getting another one out and holding their hand, and feeling like people were looking at me like I was, a bludger and not a productive member of society, and who knows what was going through anyone's mind, but I felt that I was being judged, and I know that mothers do get judged, like you said, but there's not a lot of celebration of the unpaid and often selfless work that goes into mothering. And that it all hit home, and the fact that I wasn't earning income for the first time in my adult life, because actually with my previous 2 children I was on paid maternity leave, and so that was actually like I felt my self-worth, like there was nothing to cling to. There was, and also I had put on a lot of weight. And look, I've always had a curvy body, but I put on weight and I was getting comments like from people questioning whether I was expecting another child. And so that feeling of worth in the way I looked was being questioned as well. And again, always having identified as being a good girl. I was always the good one that was following the rules and doing the right thing. And that translated for me into being a good mum. And I was like stressing over what I was feeding them and what I was like, I was not good enough on so many levels. That is how I felt at that time.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. I feel like so many mamas will be able to relate to that. I actually, when I used to be a psychotherapist working in London, I found so many, especially if you have really high standards for yourselves, if you've got like an incredible career and then you become a mom, it can really rock your sense of self-worth and identity, can't it? Because yeah, you can't be a perfect mum. You know, you can make I remember this client giving me the example of like she spent hours making this healthy meal and then her baby like threw it on the floor and didn't want it. And like normally in her job, she could have like 100% control and you know, do a great job. But in mothering, that's not how it looks, is it? Like we just have to be ourselves and be imperfect, and our children are their own people. We can't control how they show up. So I feel like that it's a really a season, like a real messy, rocky season where we can kind of have some self-worth challenges. And how do you feel like those self-worth challenges showed up for you? Like, did you notice it in you know, in your inner world, in your outer world? Like, how did you kind of start to notice those self-worth challenges?
Well, I put on a big, massive mask so that nobody could see how I was struggling. And I pretended that I had it all together and that I was coping.
Yes.
Because that's the coping mechanism I'd learned growing up, that I was very independent, very self-reliant, learned that I could do anything, and I didn't ask for help, didn't need to, shouldn't have to. And I just carried that on and quietly struggled behind the scenes, to be very honest. And like I guess there's nothing I can pinpoint as in a moment where I kind of thought the light went on and, oh gosh, my self-worth is struggling. It was more just feeling like less than my best self all the time, feeling cranky, feeling there was, you know, a good dose of poor me in there as well. But just not feeling like vital, not feeling excited about life, not feeling a sense of centeredness or groundedness or any of those things that I now realize to be really important. It was just a feeling of getting through each day and trying to turn up the way other people wanted me to, but there was nothing for me in there.
And like, do you feel like you had that mask? Do you feel like other people sense that you know, that you were experiencing that that unrest and that sense of not being enough? Or do you feel like your mask was actually pretty like well disguised?
I think I probably got away with it with a lot of people. And when I say got away with it, I wish I hadn't have done it, you know, in hindsight. But I think most people could, you know, when they don't see behind closed doors, they probably didn't realize how much I was struggling. But the people who were super close to me, like, for instance, my husband, could absolutely see it. But he was in the thick of parenthood and working and all the things too. So it wasn't like he had a lot of time to make it, you know, I mean, he supported me in so many ways, but he, like, sometimes you just have to go through the trenches in a way, right? But I'd also, at that time, we just moved back from London to maybe 2 years before that, and I hadn't quite gotten my feet back on the ground in terms of deep friendships, and you know, I hadn't really built any community around me at that time, and I'd been away for almost, I think it was 8 or 9 years, so it was a long time to be away. And I think for that reason, it was easier to get away with a mask because there wasn't actually that many people that were let into the deep inner world.
Yeah. And I think like something I found when my first daughter Emily was born, like, because actually I was kind of similar circumstances. I'd been living in Melbourne and then London for 3 years. So I'd been away from Perth for like 7 years or so. So yeah, you're kind of like trying to rebuild your relationships. And like I had a lovely mothers group, but I found like the way mums groups are set up in Australia is like quite surface level conversation. It's like, is the baby sleeping? How many times they're doing a poo? Like you do talk about very, like you're very open in mums group, but I feel like actually talking about how you're feeling within yourself is a bit taboo. Well, it felt like that in my mum's group anyway. Did you experience the same?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
being a person that loves deep conversation and finds surface level chit chat just like it's not my
Yeah.
thing. I may have been like the oversharer. And like people would be like, "Oh, all right, okay, well, I'm just going to grab a cup of tea now." Like
Yeah.
it almost wasn't okay to admit that motherhood was hard, or
Yeah.
like it, and you felt in a way that I felt, having been successful at so many other things in my life, that
Yeah.
it was almost admitting failure. I don't know if failure is the right word, but like a quality of that, like to a lesser extent, but admitting that I wasn't good enough and that I was struggling, and that really brought up some ego stuff for me to say that there's this thing that I'm doing that I don't think I'm doing super well.
Yeah.
And in fact, feeling like at times I'm a bit of a failure. But it felt taboo to even say that, or to admit that you weren't gushing with connection and love and joy, 24 hours a day for these beings that you're caring for.
I just had this moment of thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I knew you when Emily was born, because like as a fellow highly sensitive person, I think I was probably the oversharer in the mums group. And like, yeah, I think sometimes when you're struggling, if you're quite an open person, you can come across as negative too. And there's all this stuff around, oh, you only should be around high vibe people. But I think it's a reminder that sometimes if someone is sharing and they're being a bit negative in inverted commas, if you that actually maybe they're struggling, and that we maybe shouldn't have this message that you have to be positive about life all the time, or that you have to be positive about motherhood, because it really stops us from actually, getting rid of that mask and connecting and receiving support, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, I wish I knew you back then too. It makes me want to start up mothers groups for people who feel the same way.
Yeah.
And I find not just around motherhood, but around everything, in the corporate world, in the entrepreneurial world, in just every aspect of the human experience. When we don't have real conversations, when we do put on that mask, and I think it's highly encouraged by our culture to wear that mask.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not easy to be a bit vulnerable. And I'm not saying to do it with everybody, right? Like we have to use our discernment, but I think it's such a tool of disconnection when we aren't able to be our real selves, and we aren't able to find people that can hold us in our real selves, and don't have that toxic positivity kind of lens of, I'm generally a very optimistic person, but I'm also interested in the whole human experience. And I think our shadows and our heartache and our grief and all those emotions that can be labeled as negative are actually really here to show us something, things that shouldn't be swept under the rug, that we need to move through, process, and be with ourselves. And if we can never have those conversations with others, then it makes you feel like you're in this cone of silence and trying to process it on your own.
Yeah, and I think it's like what Brené Brown talks about, like if you try to build a wall around your negative emotions to like block out sadness, block out anger, any negative thoughts, you actually end up building a wall around the positive emotions too. Like we kind of can't experience the light without experiencing the shadow. And when we don't give mums permission to talk about the hard stuff and to say, hey, like, I'm not actually really enjoying this right now, or I don't feel like I'm doing a good enough job. If we don't let them do that, then they're like, they literally lose contact with the joy and the beautiful bits as well. Because I think then you just become a bit numb, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that
Mm.
I couldn't have described it any better. It is like a sense of numbness to those
Yeah.
exquisitely beautiful, joyful moments too.
Yeah.
And I now realize that that is something that I want to experience. I want to be deeply present to all of it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And like giving ourselves that permission gives each other permission, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah.
And so how, I know that it was probably, well, I imagine it would have been incredibly challenging when you've got 3 young children, knowing, you're very self-aware. You knew that you were like being critical of yourself, that your self-worth was really like vulnerable. How did you kind of attend to yourself and take care of yourself and your heart and your nervous system during this time? Is that something that you were able to do at any point?
I think I was a much less self-aware person at that time. It was actually the beginning of what I would call my awakening.
Mm.
But one thing I did do was I always had one day where my older children were in childcare, and sometimes there were 2 days,
Mm-hmm.
which may have seemed or felt like an indulgence to a lot of people, but to me it felt like my life raft, on those days where I could connect with the youngest, because he often didn't get a lot of attention, but also just, when he was napping, I could actually rest, or I could have like gentle days, where I wasn't fully on for all 3 of them. And that was really, really important. I think I didn't do a lot more, to be honest. I think I did a lot of numbing in terms of eating and watching, TV and that kind of thing. But I did, I'm trying to think what else I did at that time. I think I was really lucky in that I had a husband and have a husband who is here for the conversations and the communication and, the darker feelings as well. So I think talking to him about it and having a really understanding person really, really helped. And I've noticed that that's the way I process a lot of things, is speaking things out,
Yeah.
which is, why, you and I value the work that we do so much, because we see the value in doing that.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the main things that I did.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you weren't like very self-aware necessarily at that stage, but then, you've been on this journey. So do you feel like you could share like maybe the turning point or the aha moment or something like that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my youngest had chronic health issues, which meant that he didn't sleep for 2 years. Until he was 2 years old, he didn't sleep through. And there were a lot of foods he couldn't eat that I couldn't eat when I was nursing him and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And I just remember getting to the point where like I was overwhelmed by, all the demands of and 3 kids at home, like none of them were at school yet. And it was almost like a breakdown to get to the breakthrough, and I find that with a lot of awakenings, that's what happens, right? Like it feels like a really catastrophic or big event. And so, yeah, I think I kind of went on this journey of questioning at that time the things that my son could and couldn't eat, and realizing like how much of the food in our supermarkets is not ideal for human consumption, and before that, I'd never questioned anything like that. I just thought, no one would ever do anything that's not in our best interest, blah, blah, blah. Like I was very Pollyanna-like. And that just started me questioning things, because I was like, oh, okay, well, what else am I being told that is totally okay, but maybe isn't? And it got me questioning just everything, like the way that we're all encouraged to go through the school system and then go through the corporate world, and the version of success that we're sold, and is that really what brings me happiness? Is that my version of success? And this is the way you should look, and berating myself for not fitting a standard that I could never could never live up to ever. And it just got me questioning a lot of things, and so I think I just one by one just started letting go of all those really high standards I'd held for myself, which were not my standards anyway. They were somebody else's standards that were fed to me. And it just led through letting go of the good girl, letting go of the perfectionist, letting go of the people pleaser, letting go of the high achiever. And just one by one, these layers coming off, and trying to find out who I really was beneath all of that.
Yeah, I love that letting go of perfectionism is definitely one of the core things that you can do to support your self-worth, right? That sounds like, it's interesting how it started with food, but also really not just food, it was curiosity. Because I kind of grew up in the social work world where I was kind of trained to question things from 18 years old. Whereas you were in the corporate world, which doesn't really encourage you to question things, right? So food was almost like this, it wasn't just food, it was curiosity. It was starting to question everything. And that sounds like such an incredible, enlightening period of your life.
Absolutely. It was it was the beginning of an awakening, and I would call it a spiritual awakening, actually, where I started to really open up to what I wanted and how I wanted to create it, and what I could let go of.
Yeah. Wow. And my definition of self-worth, or the thing that I always say to support the women I support, is that I honestly truly believe that we are all born worthy and enough, and we don't actually have to do anything to be enough. And that doesn't just mean I'm enough, it also means I matter, my needs matter, all of those things. If you think about Tara back then with 3 young kids, really struggling and masking so much, how do you feel that she would have showed up differently and lived her life differently if she kind of really truly believed in her bones that she was enough, without being perfect in her job, without being perfect as a mum, without earning all that money? How do you think that time of your life would have maybe been different?
Oh my goodness, I think I would have been so much more present to myself and who I was becoming, because motherhood changes you on so many levels, and I would have been much more present for those moments with my kids, rather than being so hung up, and this is a continual practice for me, rather than being hung up on what a good mum does and doing the right thing all the time. I would have just hung out with them more, played with them more, let the washing pile up, or just let the standards go. And I think I just would have been just felt a sense of groundedness, and that enoughness is everything, isn't it? It's the center of everything, because so many of the things that we chase from a sense of not enoughness, because we're chasing that external validation. And I think if I had that internal sense of validation back then, no one would have suffered. My children would not have suffered. They would have only benefited. All my relationships would have only benefited. I would have been there is no one that would have suffered if I wasn't chasing an external validation, apart from maybe the patriarchy and all the other oppressive systems, that no one would have suffered. I would have shown up as a much better version of myself, for me, for first and foremost, and for everybody around me.
Yeah, that's so because I think often, especially in motherhood, it's so hard for us to give ourselves permission to prioritize our well-being and our inner work. But as you've just said, the way that you would have benefited from just having that unconditional self-worth also would have just brought so much presence and so much beauty to your children's lives as well, and there would have been a lot less suffering. I think that's like, oh, I just felt that in my bones. Like there's a lesson there in that, isn't there? That like self-worth is like the priority when in relation to other people, and but we don't get given a lot of space to explore it when we've got young children, do we? Like it's not like you got hours to just sit around and journal and like have a morning routine when you've got like, you know, a baby and a toddler.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm finding it, you know, even now I'm going into a season of teenage years, which I'm realizing is like another version of the toddler years.
Yeah.
And I'm finding like even just 2 minutes walking barefoot on the grass to ground me, or you know, having a quiet 5-minute cup of tea on the deck just with the sun on my face, or just those things. Like it doesn't have to be, I mean, gosh, long journaling practices and, you know, all the oracle cards and candles. Like I'm so there for all of those things and I love those. But when we don't have the time or capacity for, you know, longer practices, I really think those small bits of connection to ourselves and to something greater than us, if that's, you know, part of your belief system, then I think that, yeah, they can give you so much of it, like an energy boost and a self-worth, like just a feeling of enoughness, because in that moment, that is enough, right? That cup of tea in the sun is enough. That's all you need.
Yeah. And I think like I'm someone who supports clients to work on their self-worth. But I think like part of the reason I'm doing this series is I feel like a lot of people have this idea that like really confident, really successful humans never struggle with self-worth and enoughness. But even as you were sharing, I just had a bit of an aha moment, because I think sometimes as a mum, I put so much pressure on giving my children like a good childhood. And that even as you were talking, I was like, oh, Sam, you just need to come back to your enoughness in the way you're mothering them and just being present and joyful, not putting all this pressure that you've got to give them a good childhood. Like, because, you know, even that can look so like I grew up in the country. So I feel like a lot of the things that I had in my childhood that were good are quite hard for me to give my children growing up in the city. So it's so powerful that even when we do this work, there's just more layers of being okay with the imperfection and being okay with it's just enough what you're doing right now.
Yeah. And as someone, I imagine, who's come from the background you've come from, knowing how the things that happen in your childhood impact who you are as an adult, it lays so much pressure. Like it is open to letting you lay so much pressure on yourself to give them that perfect childhood and to make sure they don't have these massive hang-ups that, you know, you embedded in them as their mother. And I find myself doing that, like every interaction, thinking, okay, how is this going to affect their sense of self as the adults? And the permission slip I've given myself is that, you know, the whole human experience is a learning journey, and I don't want to rob my children of that. They're going to experience their own awakenings, and life is not perfect. Like I could cocoon them for their, you know, first few years of life in a way, but now that they're teenagers, I've realized that the external world, like things are going to happen, that, you know, and to get all very existential, like the human experience does involve a level of suffering, you know, and it's not that I need to cocoon them and create this perfect life for them. I can't control that, but what I can do is walk beside them and I'll, you know, walk in it with them, and rather than curating a perfect experience for them, it's letting them know that I am here to walk alongside them in whatever their life journey involves.
Oh, I feel that. I love it. I remember when COVID hit, because Emily was only 3, and I went through this grief of like, well, this is her childhood, like, you know, and I remember my supervisor at the time saying, it's not your job to protect Emily from those things. It's your job to kind of resource her to be able to navigate those. And but it's so hard. Like there's still this desire for me to, you know, make life good for her. And but I think that's something like we just keep working on it, don't we? We just keep being aware of it. And it's like layer upon layer of self-worth, and I am enough, and what I'm giving my children is enough as well. Yeah, I think. And so with your journey, like, what is there anything that you wish you knew back then that you know now? Like, I imagine there's a lot, because you've gone through this just incredible shift. But is there like a core thing that you wish you knew back then?
I think my core thing would have been like connection to self.
Mm-hmm.
Is like paramount.
Yeah.
Because we're so quick to reference ourselves to lots of external sources, like, you know, what this person will think, how society will judge me, how my kids will view my mothering, how, like, it's just, and I think it all comes back to, if I am connected to myself, I can notice my needs, you know, like on those days when you're really rushed and you don't even notice you're thirsty, or you don't even, you know, you might be hungry, but you don't really know, take time to notice that need within yourself. And I think even on that basic level, but then if you can't take care of or notice those basic needs, then how could you dive deeper and notice your deeper needs? And so I think connection to self would be my biggest thing that I would love to have gifted myself back then.
It's that connection to self, and it's that reminder, like, my needs matter. Like, even just being aware, hey, I'm thirsty right now, like I haven't drunk enough water, or, you know, it's so simple but powerful, isn't it? Because it is like that, building that connection to yourself, so that then, you know, you're aware of the deeper things too. Like, how can you know how you're feeling if you don't notice that you're thirsty first, right?
Yeah. And it can be so easy to feel like you're a brain walking, like your body's just a vehicle transporting your brain around. And I think actually our bodies hold a lot of wisdom. So I think even just connecting in with my physical needs at that time would have been the gateway to connection on so many more levels.
And this is a bit of a typical Sam tangent, because my brain likes to do this sometimes. So, but I am curious, because I guess we both identify as highly sensitive people. I found, as a highly sensitive person, my inner world is so alive and so vivid, like my being aware of my emotions and my thoughts, but I can often forget about my body. I've done so much work in therapy and breath work just trying to do that. Do you find that you've got a bit of a similar tendency if you don't work on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as someone who identifies as like an empath and an intuitive as well, like I can very much get caught in that rich inner world and forget the external. But I've actually, one of my greatest learnings over the last decade has been that my body actually holds so much wisdom. I've noticed a lot of my intuitive nudges have been like goosebumps or like tingly feelings in my body and that kind of thing. And so I've been much more curious about tuning into what my body has to say, because my mind is the conditioned part of me as well.
Yes.
And so but I absolutely, that's something that has been one of my biggest learnings is to listen to my body.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, it's something for me. My zone of awareness is definitely more my inner world, and I'm always working to come back into my body. And so is there anything else that you want to like share with our listeners, like any kind of lessons learned, or actually what I'd really love to know is, like, what do you want to say to anyone else? Like, let's imagine that there is someone listening to this episode who's struggling with their self-worth, a sense of not being enough. Maybe they're a mum of 3 young kids or first-time mum, but maybe it's actually, like, I have a lot of listeners who aren't mamas, but, you know, maybe they've moved countries, or they have taken a new job that's feeling really wobbly, or they've gone through a breakup. But, like, what do you want to say to anyone who is struggling with a season where they're really doubting themselves and feeling wobbly within their self-worth?
First of all, I love you. And I'm sending love to you, and really an invitation here to shower yourself with compassion and love. And on top of that, I would say, if you find that your sense of worth, the way you feel about yourself, tracks up and down a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be depending on how much money is in your bank account, or how many compliments somebody has paid you, or how much. I'm thinking of school certificates here for some reason, but how much other people have fed back to you, how good you are, or that kind of thing. If you find that your sense of self tracks up and down, there's a good chance that you are seeking, you're outsourcing your self-worth to other sources. And so I think just noticing that as a first step is really, really powerful, because then you can start to unwind from that and come back into giving yourself your validation and sense of worth.
Yes, I love that. It's like, how can we decide that actually we're the ones that measure our self-worth? Like, that society doesn't get to say, well, you got a gold medal, so you're worthy, but the person who came 10th isn't worthy. Like, how do we change it so that actually we're the ones that are deciding our self-worth, and we just decide that no matter what happens, I am enough, It's a really like powerful question to ask, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lifetime of practice too. Like, it's not that you suddenly reach self-worth and then you're done and that's it, you can move on. I think it's something to keep coming back into a remembering. And I love how I say the same thing as you, Sam, that we're all born and worthy, and we don't need to do anything more to earn that. And so I think it's not like in the self-development world, it's like, you've got to take on this new learning, you've got to take on this new teaching. I actually think it's coming back into remembering, and it's something that is innately in all of us. And so it's not something that you have to do or strive for or learn or fix. Letting the layers fall off and coming back into a deep sense of remembering.
Yeah, it's remembering that body, remembering that, hey, I was born worthy, I'm enough. And I always say, like, the personal development world can be a little bit toxic in that way. You have to be so careful. I always say, don't join permission granted because you want to be more worthy. Like, join it because you want to remember that you already are enough. Like, you don't, of course, you might do some great things with your life, and that's a lovely bonus. But actually, just knowing that no matter what you do, you are enough is like really the core of what we all need, I think.
Oh, that is so beautiful, that is the energy that people come into that container with. I love that.
Yeah, but it is, I think, I don't know if you find it, but sometimes in personal development, there's people coming in going, oh, I need to be fixed. I'm not good enough, so I need to do this course. And it's like, that's not why you need to do this course. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. So yeah,
it's just another way of outsourcing our sense of worth, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I love this conversation so much. Is there anything else you want to share? What's the best way for people to find you and kind of connect with you?
Wow. In terms of anything else I want to share, I think, look, we've all been through a really big few years. And so I think it's really important to just be kind to ourselves, be really kind to ourselves now. We don't realize how, sometimes we're getting on with our day-to-day life, we forget how much we've been through. And so I just want everyone to just remember that love and self-compassion. And in terms of where to find me, the best place would be Instagram, at tarawinters.co, or on my website, which is www.tarawinters.com.au. And I love connecting with other humans. I think it's one of the things that feeds my soul so much. So I'd love to connect.
Thank you so much. I'll drop all those links in the show notes as well. But thank you, Tara. I feel like this series, I wanted people to really, really share, like, vulnerably and deeply. And I'm really, really grateful that you agreed to do that with us, so generously passed on your story and your wisdom.
Oh, thank you, Sam. It's been such a joy to be here today.